Ukraine's much anticipated spring offensive hasn't yet started. Why not? The first obvious one is the weather. We've been waiting for the spring weather to pass. Why is that important? Because 60-ton tanks, which will form an incredibly important part of the punch through Russian front lines, need to be able to operate off-road if they're going to be remotely maneuverable and cause Russia some problems. And the terrain in the winter and the spring is just too soft for those very heavy tanks. Also, Ukraine has been given a whole mass of new equipment: tanks, armored personnel carriers, missiles and weapons, which it will not be familiar with, and therefore making sure that all of their soldiers are not only aware of how to use these weapons, but also how to maintain them, how to repair them, and how to logistically support them is vital. And finally, Ukraine has had to recruit a whole load more soldiers to be prepared for this spring offensive. Now, those new recruits are incredibly well motivated and inspired, but they're very inexperienced, and the battlefield is no place to learn your trade. So there'll be a massive training, operational training going on, learning how to withstand the rigors of battle so that they are fully prepared once the offensive gets underway. The West has naturally assumed that Ukraine will deliver a decisive success with the forthcoming spring offensive. President Zelenskyy has had to work hard with Western leaders to give them the confidence that a David Ukraine can actually prevail against the Goliath of Russia. He's been very persuasive, the West has given the weapons, and now there's a huge emphasis on Ukraine to actually deliver on the battlefield. Now, everybody hopes that Ukraine will be successful with the offensive, that it breaks through Russian lines and actually moves and takes a huge amount of its territory back again, undermining Russian confidence, potentially changing the course of the war. That is one option. However, the other option is that actually Ukraine stumbles with Russian defences proving incredibly stoical. Ukraine will lose 3 times as many soldiers on the offence than it does on the defence, and potentially that risks undermining Ukraine's operational capability. That would also erode the West's confidence in continuing to support Ukraine and would bolster Russian confidence, and therefore potentially they could mount a counterattack and take even more land. The stakes could not be higher. There's a huge amount resting on President Zelenskyy's shoulders when he decides when to start this offensive. It will be a complex plan. It won't be simple. It'll have a whole mass of deception plans associated with it. It'll have a multi-axis approach with different lines of attack. And undoubtedly, there'll be a huge logistics challenge with this as well. President Zelenskyy will want that plan to be 100% perfect. The harsh reality of life in warfare is that 90% nearly always has to be good enough, and that will be a challenge for Zelenskyy to know when that point is reached. I would not underestimate the burden of responsibility on President Zelenskyy's shoulders on the eve of the spring offensive. It's a huge responsibility for one man to carry. On the eve of D-Day, our Prime Minister Churchill dined with his wife Clementine and opined to her that come this time tomorrow, 20,000 lives might have been lost on D-Day, on the invasion of France. President Zelenskyy has proven to be a brilliant wartime leader, but he doesn't have the military experience to help him make a judgment about when to start this spring offensive. He's only been a politician for a few years and was an actor and a comedian before that. If this was difficult for Churchill, it's incredibly difficult for President Zelenskyy to make that call, given the very future of his country is at stake and tens of thousands of his countrymen as well.
Slava Ukraini!
It's a huge burden of responsibility, but one only Zelenskyy can carry.